Hello, everyone. My name is Birgit Hippel, and the webinar we're going to be doing today is getting ready for year end. So hopefully you guys are in the right webinar. Oh my gosh, hope I'm not going to be tongue-tied today. So want to make sure everybody's audio is good and that you guys can hear me okay. All right. And we'll go ahead and get started. So today's webinar is really looking at, are we ready for year end? Reviewing those month-end procedures. And so therefore, once we get to year end, hopefully there's not a whole lot we need to do if we've been balanced throughout the year. We're also going to look at your 1099s and making sure that those are set up properly. How can you file those? We're going to be doing that part in the beginning. So there are some who don't need to stay for the entire webinar, and they're really here for the 1099 reporting. So if you need to, you can drop off after that. If you guys have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. I may not answer those questions immediately. There are some questions that I may ask you to go ahead and reach out to your account manager, and maybe based on your specific situation, it might be easier to answer with your account manager here at Workamajig. If I am either speaking too fast or you do have something that you want me to address, please don't hesitate to let me know. And let's see, what else? I think that's it. So if we're ready, I know we've got quite a few people still coming in, and hopefully everybody can hear me. Let's start with those vendors. Let me go ahead and share my screen. We do, by the way, have some great help guide articles, and I will be addressing those as we go through this process. If you do, again, have an area that maybe I lightly touched upon in the webinar, but you would like to have more information, then please do not hesitate to reach out to support at Workamajig, and we'll go ahead and get a call scheduled for you and be able to kind of run through that process with you. All right, so let's go ahead and start talking first about our 1099 setup, making sure how we print those. Are you having to e-file or not e-file? I know every year there's changes. From the last I had heard now that if you have 10 contractors or more that you're filing 1099s on, then you must e-file. I will say that with the IRS, you'll want to make sure that you're registered with them early because it does take them a while to respond. We do have a link here to the IRS government instructions. And if you click on those, I went ahead and looked up two of them. There is something, and we're going to review this, something called FIRE, and then something called IRIS, IRIS. Where is it? Oh, this one's FIRE. I think the other one is IRIS. Yeah, there we go. So there's two different ways to file electronically. And so we'll kind of talk about that as we get to that point of where we're actually printing those 1099s. But our help guide, if you do not have our help guide bookmarked, it's easy to do. It's support.workamajig.com. And then on this one, it's the 1099 setup and printing. And it does go through the entire section on how you should set up your vendors. And then, of course, how we'll get to that point of printing those. If we come over here to purchasing, to your vendors, and I happen to, of course, have my one freelance vendor already set up. My vendor details are here. When I look at the purchasing defaults or the payment options, sorry, this is where I've got my different forms. So whether it's the 1099 for the miscellaneous or the NEC, contractors are NEC, which will automatically default in the O1, the employee non-employee compensation box. It's the only box that they have. If you happen to choose one of the other ones, then of course, then you have all the others. It was a number of years ago that all your contractors used to be under miscellaneous 7, and then they split that out and they changed it back, or they changed it so that they're now separated. Those are NEC with the non-employee compensation form. So If you have that set up on your freelancer, that's all that you, or your contractor, that's all that you really need to do. Now, the way that Workamajig tracks 1099s is that it is not based on the vendor invoices. It is based on the payments. So you may have vendor invoices that have not yet been paid. Okay. So in fact, let me invoice open amount. Let me save that. So I've got a couple of these that haven't been paid and one from last year, but two from this year that have been paid. Well, that is what the 1099 is going to be based on. So when you look at the payment, whoops, not at the vendor invoice, sorry, should go down to the payment. When we go down to the payment, then the payment is being fully applied against this vendor, okay, to the 1099 dollar amount that you have to report. However, if you have anything that you want to exclude, maybe your vendor purchased some supplies that you're just reimbursing them for that is not part of their non-employee compensation, then you can just go ahead and enter that amount in here. And so then the system would say, okay, I'm going to report $14.75 to the IRS and exclude $100 of that. Okay, that field is available even though the payment is already posted, because that has no bearing on the posting to the general ledger at all. It is just when you get ready to go ahead and report your 1099, what amount are we including in that reporting? Okay. When I go over to purchasing, and you could do this from your report center or from the Today Purchasing page. On your Today Purchasing page, we do have the purchasing reports. Okay, so if this is where you're reporting out the 1099 detail, and just to verify your data, and then here's the actual filing for the report. You have the same options under the Everyone button, the Report Center, and if you come down to AP reports, it's the same exact two reports. Okay, I tend to like to get to my reports from my Today pages rather than necessarily going to the Report Center, just because I'm on that page already and I can access those. Now, the 1099 vendor detail report is basically just giving you an opportunity to say, well, if I'm looking at, this fiscal year, and I go ahead and generate this, it's an opportunity to make sure, do you have, the vendors, the addresses in there, all of the information. It's an opportunity to report on that. And if you notice on this one, make this a little bit larger, is that vendor payment where I had reduced the payment by $100, saying, I was reimbursing my contractor for some supplies, that this is now $14.75 that would be reported to the IRS. Okay. The minimum amount, of course, defaults in is $600 because that's been the basis for a long time now. So that's the amount that comes in. The payment type. So this was also a change that was done probably, I'd say, maybe at least 3 years ago, trying to remember when I first mentioned it. Any vendors that are paid through credit cards or through FastPay, AvidX, CSI, Edenred, any of those ones that are payment providers that handle that for you, whether it's, it's a PayPal account or something like that, they are actually required to report your 1099s for you. I don't understand how that works. Not sure how it does. So basically for you, you're reporting on anything that you actually are writing a check for or doing an ACH. Everything else is going to be reported by your other providers. Now, we have an option in here that says include credit card payments. And really, those credit card payments are to be excluded. However, if you are trying to run this for past years and you're wanting to run the report where those should be included, because right now, if you pay your vendors with a credit card, then your credit card company is the one who's actually to file to the IRS. But you have the option to include it. Any current reporting that you should be doing, that should be unchecked. Okay. And this is really just a report to double check your data. If I come over to the 1099 NEC, this is actually the filing area where you're going to run this. So if we go ahead and look at this for last year, we're looking at our reporting year of 2023. Of course, when we do this, it'll be 2024, and then we'll be looking at last year again. Our minimum amount here is still the $600. It still is looking at the checking and the payment types of ACH, but if you look at the drop down, you can include those. Although again, if you're using AvidX, AvidX is to be, or FastPay, now called AvidX, is supposed to be filing your 1099s for you. So this is why they're excluded, but it is available in the list. So we've automatically defaulted to what it should be. If you're doing your 1099 contractors versus if you're doing any other reporting, but this is really our contractors that we're reporting on. Now, you can do the PDF. So if you do a PDF of this, this will look very odd because it's just the fields that you need filled out in the form. So you run out to your local Office Max or Staples Supply store or anything and you buy that form, put it into your printer. This knows exactly how to print it. Every year, the engineers go through and make sure that the form lines up with the government's version of the current year form. Now, last year, I believe they changed it so that the form is no longer changing, hopefully, unless they make some new changes again. But as of this year, they didn't make any changes. And what they did was by allowing the reporting year to go on there, that's actually what's showing up on the form. So now they have a year form rather than saying hard coded on their forms. They actually have a field where it gets automatically printed in based on the year that you're printing. So hopefully this means that the engineer or that the IRS is no longer going to be changing this form every year. But again, our engineers do keep an eye on that and they have the most current form set up that the IRS wants. Now, this, of course, is if you need to print your forms and then send them off. And again, if you've got 10 or more contractors, the IRS is requiring you to e-file. Now, if we come over here and look at this, we also have an Excel format form. We have the Fire e-file and the Iris e-file. So when we look over here, I think this was the Fire one. So you actually need to set up an account with Fire in order to get this one to be able to take the file. It's a text file that gets printed. So if I were to come over to here and I do, it's a text file. Excuse me, I've got a frog in my throat. It creates a text file that's not editable. You can't go in and kind of muck around with the file, but you take that file, you come over to here, you've got your account set up, and then you can go ahead and import that in and upload that file. If you do the e-file, okay, what it does is it says, here you go, we're going to generate the Fire file for you. And you can even do a test file. So if this is the first year that you're doing the e-filing with Fire for IRS, then you can go ahead and create a test file. They will allow you to use that as a test file so that you're not actually reporting on your 1099 yet. And there's a spot I know that once you set up your account, it will allow you to import in a test file to make sure that everything is set up correctly. If you generate the IRS e-file, which I believe is this one, yep, the IRS. Again, you have to set up your account with the IRS and determine which way you're going to go. Now, this file is actually a CSV formatted file, and there's no validation. It was kind of very difficult to work with, according to the engineer. I spoke with him about it. He said that if you really want to do something, do the Fire e-file. It's been out there a long time. It's been there for a while. All the fields are validated, and he has the file set up so that it's a nice upload into the system. for next year, or we were hoping for this year, and there's still the slight possibility that we're going to have an actual API where you can generate, excuse me, you can generate the file out of Workamajig and it will automatically upload to the IRS website. That is still being worked on. We are still dealing with the same thing that everybody else is, trying to get an account set up with them, trying to get the test file as a developer to be able to set up that API. It's slow moving with the engineer or with the IRS as far as them giving Workamajig access and the test data that they need in order to do that. So not sure that's going to be available by the time we need to file 1099s in January or the end of January, beginning of February. But I would keep an eye on the notes. So if it does come available, it would be available probably in January and hopefully everything works well. Otherwise, right now, the suggestion is if you have to upload, log in or sign up with the IRS for a file. File. Boy, that's tongue twisting. All right. Let me see. We noticed last year that if you generate the PDF report and print it, the fields on the form do not line up correctly, so need to print directly to the form. Oh, okay. Yeah, you have to. So if you generate the PDF, then you put when you hit print, then you should be able to print that. If you're having any issues when you do print those, definitely let us know. Yeah, save the PDF and then open it Adobe and print. Thank you. We use Avalara to e-file on our behalf. Will there be an API for this, or is this another CSV file we could download? That we're still working on. We're working, I don't know if there's anything in the works right now with Avalara for their e-filing. So if you're e-filing through them, probably having to create the file out of Workamajig, maybe in Excel and then CSV up to them. That is still Avalara for us is new, and we're still just trying to fine tune all of the sales tax side of things. So for those who are not familiar with Avalara, we have now partnered with Avalara to file sales taxes. So there's a lot of different municipalities that have thresholds before you file your sales tax and everything. So Avalara is the sales tax module that we integrate with, and so sales tax can be accurately reported, and then they can do the filing for you. But I will keep an eye on that for you. I know your question is out there, and it's still something that we're keeping an eye on. Okay. All right. Any questions at all about 1099s before we start to move on from that? No problem. All right, 1099. So for those who need to drop off or aren't interested in the rest of our webinar, boy, I am just tongue-tied today, and I apologize for that. All right, so part of our month end or part of our financial reporting is, of course, making sure that we're doing our month-end procedures. And for those of you who are already doing this perfectly, this is awesome. I'm hoping to maybe possibly show you some tips and tricks that I look at and that I want to make sure that my clients are aware of when we go through these month-end procedures. And really, the month-end procedures are that ability to say, if I'm doing this every single month, by the time I get down to year-end process, there's really nothing extra I need to do. I just need to make sure that my December balances and everything is good, and then I can start running all of my financial reports. So if we're looking at our month-end procedures and we're coming over to our today accounting page, we're really looking at this section in here for items needing attention is our first place that we always want to make sure that we go to. Again, if you do this monthly, then it's easy to maintain, easy to see when you're out of balance somewhere, and easier to fix an issue before you start to close those periods, where we get a lot of those questions that says, well, we already closed those periods and now we found an error. I can't go back and open up that period. And that happens a lot. So hopefully these month-end procedures, which really walks you through everything very clearly, will be helpful in kind of eliminating some of those issues. Of course, the unapproved transactions. There's no way to approve these transactions in mass. There's going to be different people who are supposed to be approving these different things, but it is supposed to be a reminder that says, hey, these are all things that are going to be posting to your general ledger if they get approved. We want to make sure that they get approved before you start closing those periods. Approved, posted, and then you can close that period. You can click on the individual items within here to see, hey, this hasn't been, it's a December or it's in October. We're getting ready to close October. So we want to make sure how come this invoice wasn't approved, and making sure then if it should be approved that it gets posted before you go on. So it does kind of sort things by the type. So if you had credit card charges or something else, if you go through a journal entry approval process, those would be listed here. You can run it based on a specific date range, so that if you've got a lot of data in there for the current month, that is okay that they're still not yet approved. They're going through their approval process, but you want to make sure that everything prior to, for the month that you're getting ready to close, has already been approved, or at least deleted, voided, etc. Unposted transactions. The unposted transactions is, again, same type of thing. Transactions that are going to be posting to your general ledger. How come they have not posted yet? If you ever end up with some out of balance issues with accounts receivable, accounts payable, maybe your deferred accrual account, that could be because you've got some things that are unposted, whereas maybe the client invoice is not posted, but the receipt has already been posted. So it didn't go into accounts receivable, but it came out of accounts receivable, and now your AR aging doesn't match your accounts receivable account. So there are things in here that can cause out of balance issues. If you have some out of balance issues, I would work first with your unposted transactions. That may fix some of those out of balance issues. Now, it will post based on the date that you have listed here. You can mass post. So if you were to select all, you can go ahead and mass post. If you're the person who's kind of reviewing and wanting to make sure that these are posting to the correct accounts, then you can do what we call a pre-posting report. It will basically show you all of the transactions here, and it will either show you by account or by transaction. Now, I tend to like the one more by transaction because it makes more sense to me. Like a client invoice should be posting to accounts receivable and then an income account. If I'm looking at it by just account, I see everything that's going into the bank, everything that's going into accounts receivable, and it's harder for me to just figure out what's right and wrong. So if I were to run a pre-posting report and I come in here, you can see that this invoice is going to be going to advance bill and then the revenue account. And I'm not sure why. Oh, yeah, because it's not going to account. Oh, that's one. It's weird. What's this one? Let's see. This is gross revenue. It's not an advance bill. Is that the one that was on there? I have to look. It's not an advance bill. Okay, and it's going to accounts receivable. So that must have been a different transaction. But as you look through these, you can see each invoice and say, hey, here's the invoice. It's going to accounts receivable. These are the different income accounts it's going to go to. And you can review to make sure that everything's posting to the correct account. Then you can come over and mass post your transactions. Okay. All right. What if there are unposted transactions that you no longer want? How do you wipe them out? So the question would be on that: if you have transactions in here and they're not posted, they have never hit your general ledger. So there would be, if you delete them, it would have no bearing on your general ledger. If you can't delete them, because some will say, well, if I created this client invoice in error and I shouldn't have done it, then I would go ahead and, void the invoice, and then I would have to make sure I post both. Either one will have no true bearing on your ledger, as long as you make sure that the void is posting to the same date as the invoice. So for example, if I didn't want this invoice, I could come in here and void it. It would create a negative of this, but I would want to set it for the same date. Then I could post them both. They're both posting to the same date. They're going to have no effect on my general ledger. Either that, or you can delete it. It just depends on the process that you have at your company as to whether you're allowed to delete those or not, or whether you would actually have to finish going through the process, post it, and then void it, and post the void for the same date. Okay. Hopefully that answered your question. And yep. All right. Let's see. Should just keep the chat. On the transaction you don't want, how do you know if you should void it or delete it? That is really kind of an internal question. I have some clients that say, like for client invoices, once the invoice has a number, they're not allowed to delete it because they cannot skip any of their invoice numbers. They need to be able to see invoice 1 all the way up to 100 with no exceptions. There's nothing missing from the system. They account for everything, even if it means they had to approve it, post it, and then void it. And now we have the number 105 void. It's still accounting for that invoice number. A lot of my clients, they've deleted invoices and had no problems, and it skips number and it's not a problem. So that's really more of an accounting question as far as like what your office wants to do. Same thing applies with check numbers. Hey, we have check stock. Every check must be accounted for. I can't just say we, wrote this check number and then, deleted it. No, I always have to keep the check number. I may have to void it to show that the check number was used, never cashed, and I did a void. Okay. Most of my clients will say it's okay to delete, especially if it's a client invoice, you know, um, they'll delete it. I do have a few that say, nope, every transaction must be accounted for and you cannot delete. Hopefully that answered your question on that. All right. The unposted transaction. So again, coming to our month-end procedures, you review those unapproved transactions. You want to make sure that you post all of the transactions that need to be posted, because again, remember that anything that is on this unposted, and here's, almost $13,000 worth, has not yet hit my general ledger. So it's not hit my accounts receivable and it's not hit my income accounts. So there is definite bearing on your books when you have things in here, whether they should be deleted or, should be posted. Okay. All right. Month-end procedures as we come down. Post work in progress. Not sure how many of you are actually posting work in progress. I have probably a small percentage compared to those who don't post work in progress. And posting work in progress, in fact, let me go ahead and get the help guide out. It's called Post Work in Progress, or what some will say WIP. Okay, our WIP, basically what it's doing, and if you want a good definition of, why you might want to post WIP or not post WIP, is it's really that ability to what we call normalize your expenses and your income to be in the same period. Now that's a fancy way of saying, let's say you have $10,000 worth of expenses in January and you haven't billed the client yet. So I have all these expenses and no income. Then February comes along and I finally get to bill my client for those $10,000 of expenses, and I have a little bit of a markup and I got to bill the client $12,000. Now in February, I have all of this income. but I have no expenses. So in January, I didn't look like I did that great. In February, I looked like I did really well, when in reality, between those 2 months, I really made about $2,000. And that posting work in progress is basically saying, I'm going to hold your expenses and not show them as an expense in the system. They're going to be an asset, and they're going to then show when you actually bill the transaction, so that I get revenue and expense in the same month. That looks a little bit more normal, nor more a little bit more accurate as to what actually happened. Okay. So for those who are already posting work in progress, you guys know the drill on what happens. Ends of the month comes along, you want to make sure that you have billed all of your projects before you ever post work in progress. Post work in progress always happens afterwards, because what post work in progress does is it basically says, I'm going to take all the transactions that did not get billed and I'm going to post them into WIP. And I'm going to also then, for any of the transactions that did get billed, I'm going to take them back out of WIP. So it's basically it goes into WIP and out of WIP as those transactions happen. So when you're in here, you have all of your batches of every month that you post WIP. Some will post WIP more often than once a month. Some will post it, generally most people do it once a month. Now, when you do post WIP, it does kind of lock those transactions down. You'll see transactions within your system that says, hey, this was posted into WIP. This expense was posted into WIP. And so we kind of now have this asset, and maybe the expense was $10,000. Well, you cannot now just go and unpost that transaction and make changes to that vendor invoice, because the system says, wait, I've already posted $10,000 to the general ledger. You actually have to unpost your WIP first in order to be able to edit that vendor invoice and make changes to it, and then repost work in progress again. So it does kind of slow things down a little bit and ties things up a lot more, but it does work very well. What the system will do, of course, is when you go to post work in progress, you can do a pre-posting report. So if you want to know what's going to post into WIP or out of WIP at the time that it's going to happen, you can do a pre-posting report that says, hey, I can go ahead and look at all of this. So this is labor that was unbilled that's going to get posted into WIP. Okay. And it shows you by project and by service what's going to be posting into WIP. And then let's see if I have any expenses in here. Then I've got some reimbursable expenses, some miscellaneous costs that haven't been billed yet. So they're posting into WIP. Later on the following month, when they get billed, they're going to post back out of WIP, and then you're going to have that revenue and expense in that same period. Same thing here when we start getting into expenses. I've got vendor invoices that are posting into WIP. So it removes it from your COGS. You don't have a COGS expense, you have now an asset. And then when you bill it, we're going to take it back out of that asset account, give you your expense back, and you're going to have expense and revenue in the same period. If you do have any questions about wanting to or even considering posting work in progress, definitely review the help guide on this. We really go into detail about, when do you post to WIP? How do you monitor it? What goes in and out of WIP? What doesn't post to WIP? And we get a nice detailed help guide here. And then, of course, you're always welcome to set up a call with your account manager and review that process of posting WIP. If you do post WIP, then one of the reports that you should be looking at is the WIP analysis report. So once again, on your Today Accounting page, you have all of your financial reports. So whether you go to your report center and look at your financial reports, or you come to your Today Accounting page, you can scroll down and you can look at your WIP analysis report. The WIP analysis report is really nice because it gives you an account summary and says, okay, this is what you currently have posted in to WIP for labor, for your production costs, if you're doing any media, If you're doing any miscellaneous costs, expense reports, etc., those all are showing you what's in those accounts. The numbers down here, unposted labor, is if you were to post WIP today, this is all the unbilled labor that has yet to either be billed or we're going to go ahead and post it into WIP. And you can click into that to see exactly those transactions that haven't been posted into WIP yet and that would get posted the next time you do. You can also look at your project details. So we break down the amounts that are in your WIP accounts as to whether it's labor and what project does it come from and whether it's expenses or not. And again, what projects do those come from? So, if you look at this, you can see that this was an images and it was a vendor invoice. Question here is always, hey, how come this project hasn't been billed yet? So it's a way to kind of keep an eye again on all of that that's sitting in WIP and why have these not been billed yet. We do have WIP aging. So if you want to see, so if I come in here and say, well, okay, of all this labor, how long has this been sitting here and why have we not billed? I can look at the WIP aging and say, okay, this is 90 days old. Why has this project not yet been built? Has it been canceled? Should we, mark as billed? Should we write these transactions off? What should we do? So again, it's an ability to kind of keep an eye on those WIP accounts and what's posted in there. All right. Any questions? Nope. We're doing good so far. So any questions on posting WIP? If you do not post WIP and you have this showing up here, or you don't have this showing up and you'd like to post WIP, there is your settings in here. So for those who have access to this, your system settings, this is what determines what is visible under this section. So if you don't want to see work in progress because you never do it and you hate seeing just this blank thing here, you can uncheck this from this area here and it will no longer display. Okay. So let's go back to our month-end procedures. Now we're running the balance sheet, the corporate P&L, AP, and AR aging. This is when we're starting to get into looking, are we truly balanced or not? So I'm going to come back to our open account rec over here, but our AR balanced and our AP balanced. If you see the current date up here, that means that the system has already verified that your AP aging report and your AR aging report are actually matching the same accounts on your accounts receivable and on your accounts payable on your balance sheet. If there is something here that says check date, you would need to actually determine when you went out of balance. So if we look at AR balance, so mine are currently balanced here, and I'm looking at client invoices. If you have more than one accounts receivable account, you would need to select the account and you can click here and find the date of last balance. That would tell the system, okay, you were last balance on, October 31st. That means on November 1st, you did something that caused you to go out of balance. And basically what the system is doing is it's saying, if I'm running this for my client invoices and I generate this on the screen, the total of all my invoices, 17,517, should match my accounts receivable account. And this, of course, is rounding up. And so if I look at all and I search 17,517.62. So that's what the balance does, is it says I have invoices that match what's in my current accounts receivable account. And when those two match completely, then you will get the date here. And that's what you would like to make sure that you see each day. Now, if you are ever out of balance on your AR or AP aging, we do have a help guide article for that. I think it's called Out of Balance. Troubleshooting out of balance. Now, it doesn't go through a ton of detail, but it gives you a starting point of things that can cause you to go out of balance. Okay. And lots of times, again, it might be that you have unposted transaction. The client invoice is not posted, so it never went into accounts receivable. However, it has been paid and the payment of the receipt has already been posted. So it's no longer showing up on accounts receivable or your AR aging report, I should say, because it's already been paid. However, accounts receivable is saying, wait, you took money out when the receipt was received. So out of balances can happen specifically because of those unposted transactions. And that's why I would always say start with that first, then see if that already helps your out of balance issues. If you still have out of balance issues at that point, you can always reach out to us and we'll be happy to help. Now, the AR aging report actually has 3 different reports within one. So there's when it's checking for date of last balance or it's showing you the date, it's only comparing really your open client invoices against your accounts receivable account. The unapplied advance bills, that is if you have a um, an advance bill that has not been fully recognized with revenue yet. And so if I go ahead and click on this one and hit generate, these are advance bills, not necessarily that they haven't been paid by the client, but that they still have an unapplied amount. So if I look at this one's been paid by the client, but out of this advance bill, there is still another $6,600 that's waiting to be revenue recognized. So if you're ever wondering how much is in your unapplied account, this amount here, all of these open amounts for what's not yet been applied to a revenue invoice, this amount here should once again up balance to your advance bill accrual account. Okay, that's what we're doing when we're doing these month-end procedures. We're doing that for AP, AR, the accrued order detail, and your advance bill account right here. So you want to make sure that that is also balanced. So if you run that accounts receivable, unapplied advances, that is what is still remaining to be applied to a revenue invoice. This amount should balance to your deferred account. Okay. The last one we have in here is unapplied receipts. Now, the unapplied receipts is when you enter a receipt into the system, but you haven't yet applied it to an invoice. It will show up as available as a prepayment for a future invoice. So, for example, if I go ahead and show this on screen, I have this receipt that was received. It posted to my unapplied account, excuse me, posted to my unapplied account. And if I look at future client invoices for this client and come down to invoices, and I've got this one, it will show up as a prepayment amount. I can apply this receipt now to a future invoice as a prepayment. Okay, so anytime you have these in your AR aging and it says open receivable, that means you've entered a receipt. You might sometimes, what I see a lot is a client will mispay an invoice. They'll be off by 5 cents or 10 cents or 3 cents. And you see a lot of these, 1 penny amounts here. The only way to clear those out is to create a revenue invoice and apply the receipt as a prepayment against that. Again, if you have any questions about some of this, in order to clean up your system and make sure that your unapplied amounts are correct. Hey, yes, this one is correct. Client paid us. We didn't have the invoice yet. We'll apply it on a future. That will be great. Otherwise, if you've got all these little penny amounts, then, create a revenue invoice, apply the prepayment to it, and it will close those out. Okay. Now, in this accounts receivable, I have an allowance for doubtful account. Now, there becomes a lot of question as to whether allowance for doubtful account is actually an accounts receivable account. Some will call it something else. for those who do call it an accounts receivable account, this checking your balance is going to look at all of your different accounts and to see whether they're balanced or not. And an allowance for doubtful account will never have client invoices in it. It's a journal entry that says this is what we don't think we're going to get in receivables. So it's never going to show balanced. If you have an allowance for doubtful account and it's causing you to say, if I click on this and, well, mine has no transactions, but if you had journal entries in there over time, it would actually say, hey, you weren't balanced from that first journal entry. You can come into your system setup, go to your GL settings and in your GL accounts. And if I go for my allowance for doubtful account, this account right here, you can exclude it from the today accounting. And all that's doing is saying when the system goes through the do that check date to see if you're balanced or not, it's not going to look at this account because this account is never going to be balanced. It's always going to have journal entries in it and it's, never going to balance to the balance sheet. So if you say exclude from accounting, it won't use it in that check date here. Okay, it will ignore it. Any questions so far? Let's see on AR aging. Okay, AP aging is going to be the exact same way. Oh, and I did want to show you guys if I have, so this is my other account and I'm also balanced on this account, but I do have many different accounts in here. So I have also multi-currency in mine. So if I'm running my AR aging report, I can go ahead and check my Canadian account with my Canadian AR account. I need to choose both. When I do the find date of last balance, it will tell me that this account is either currently in balance or I'm out of balance. So if you do get a check date here and you've got multiple AR accounts, you will have to check each account individually in order to determine whether it's balanced or not. All right. Question. Will I be giving this webinar? No. I'm not going to do this webinar again at the end of the year, but this recording will be available in the help guide under the webinar section. We do post those, so it usually takes a couple days and we will post the recording for this webinar. Okay. Also too, if you do just want to have a one-on-one with your account manager and make sure that your account is balanced and how do you check it. And if you've got some things that need to be cleaned up, set up a call with your account manager. I'm sure they're not going to appreciate I said that, but you can set up a call directly with your account manager just to run through this and see what needs to be cleaned up. How do we clean it up now that we've got these specific transactions, such as things in the unposted transactions area, or even in the unapproved transactions area, or we've got some out of balance issues. Okay. AP aging works basically the same way where you can choose if you've got multiple different accounts, find the date of the last payment or last balance, and it's going to be saying, hey, I'm running my accounts payable account. This, the amount of vendor invoices that I have in the system should match then what's on the balance sheet over here. So for my accounts payable, they do match, and that's why it says that I am currently balanced. Now, there is also an include unapplied payments. Now, this one's set up a little bit differently than the way the AR one is, where you actually can toggle to say I'm looking at client invoices or I'm looking at my unapplied receipts, and they are separate reports. In the AP side, you say, hey, do I have any unapplied payments in here? It would show in the same one as when I do my AP aging. And so I do have an open payment right here. And you can see by the type that it says it's an open payment. So I created a payment. I didn't have a vendor invoice yet for it. We knew it was on the way, but the vendor wanted their check now. They were still going to send us another copy of the vendor invoice. I've got this unapplied amount. So if I have any future vendor invoices, and I don't know if I do, Oh, here we go. If I have any future vendor invoices, you see it shows up as I have a prepayment and I could apply it to that vendor invoice. Okay. So again, it's more just making sure that you know what's in your AP aging report and whether it's matching to your balance sheet or not, because of course that's what you're reporting off of. Now, I'm going to come back again. Still, we'll whip back around to these account recs. Account balances here. If you're not seeing all of the accounts that you want, especially if you're new in the system, once again, in that system settings area, when I scroll down here, account balances, this determines what balances I want displayed here. So you may only want, your AP, AR, and your bank accounts up here. You may want to include your credit card account so that you can see those balances as they come in. Whenever you click on any of these, the system automatically just shows you what was done in the current month. So it pulls up just the current month period. However, from there, you can go back and start to either create a custom date range or say, hey, I'm looking at everything, and I can go through the all and see everything within there. So that filter option, when it first opens up, just assumes that when you're clicking on any one of these accounts, it's only going to open up for the current month. And that is because we either chose the current month or the old way in our old system, it used to show everything. Well, for some of our clients who have been in the system, 5, 10 years, you pop open that accounts receivable and you're just waiting as that thing just churns and loads and loads and loads, goes back through history. And you're thinking, all I wanted to look at was currently what's on this month. So we kind of changed that so that when you pop something open from here, it's automatically only going to look at this month, and then from there you can go back and start to say, oh, what are you looking at this fiscal quarter, etc. Now, one of the nice things too is that whenever you're in, let's say, one of your accounts, and let me go back to the all, you have the ability in your filters to look for specific transaction types. Hey, I'm in my bank account and I'm looking just for a journal entry that happened, 3 months ago. And you could narrow things down this way by looking for a specific transaction type and saying, hey, I'm looking for just receipts that came in, and I'm only looking at receipts. Again, remembering too that this screen, like so many of your other screens, if you're not seeing all the fields that you need to see based on what you're doing within the system, you can come in here to system settings and you can edit those columns. Because I know as the default, the date field isn't normally included in there, and I don't know why. That should be part of our default. So again, you can control the order that they're coming in and what you need to see. Each of these that are in blue means that it's a drill down. You can actually pop the transaction open from there. Okay, let's see. All right. Okay, let's go to account reconciliations. Now, one of my little cheats is if you've got an open account reconciliation, it will show up here. It wants to remind you that it still needs your attention. So you want to make sure that, hey, before again we start doing month end and we start closing everything up, we want to make sure that all of those bank recs for that prior period are completed. Now, when you click over here and you open up that bank rec, you see just the ones that are open. You can come down and scroll down here to account reconciliations and go and search and do a specific find. Sometimes what I do when I'm kind of troubleshooting in people's accounts is I just go to their open rec up here, and then from here I say, show me all the completed recs, and then I can kind of pop to those reconciliations from there. Now, what we want to always make sure that we do is whenever we look at a bank reconciliation, this one's my open one, let's go to one that's finalized. We want to make sure, obviously, that your statement difference is 0. That's a given. But we also want to make sure that your book balance matches your ledger balance. Okay. The book balance is basically what's matching based on the screen. I told you the beginning balance was this. I had these increases. I had these creases. This was my statement difference. This is what I have according to this reconciliation. The ledger balance is looking at this date and going and running the bank account for that up to that date and saying, what's the balance that Workamajig says it has over here as of that date? So if I were, to back this date up, I forgot what the date was now, 10/31. So if I were to back this date up to 10/31, oops, that's 23. I need to go to 22. My bank account says 235,784, and of course that's rounding up or rounding down. So when I'm going ahead and looking at these reconciliations, I want to make sure that these two match. If they do not match, lots of times what it is you ended up pulling a transaction in here that was after the posting date. So the bank, your account reconciliation is saying, hey, you pulled in an October 1 transaction, and I'm reflecting it in this number. However, when I'm looking at the ledger balance, I'm only pulling directly up to 9/30. So sometimes that can cause an out of balance. Sometimes there could be posting date issues on when you're pulling it in, but your receipt is posted for, a month later than it should be because fat fingered posted the date on that. So there could be a number of reasons, once again, that they don't balance. If you do have any questions and you're not sure how to figure out why they're not, then make sure that you go ahead and reach out to support, and we'd be happy to look at that for you. Excuse me. All right. Any other questions? Last thing that we want to do, so, the accrued order detail report. On the accrued order detail report, you actually have to go to your purchasing or your everyone button. So the accrued order detail report is really the one that says, I've pre-billed purchase orders, insertion orders, or broadcast orders, doesn't matter which one. I've pre-billed those, and those are still waiting for a vendor invoice to come in, and they're now still sitting in my accrued order detail account. And you might have a different accrued order account for media versus purchase orders, and that's fine. So if you're on the Today Purchasing page, once again, under your purchasing reports, there is an accrued order detail report. Now this report, and you would run it for the end of the last month that you were balancing to, you go ahead and run the report. And what the report says is, these are all the orders that have been pre-billed, but you're still waiting for a vendor invoice. So it's sitting in what we call these pre-bill accrual accounts. The total of my purchase order account plus my media account should match the total in my pre-bill accrual account report. So these are all the orders that are waiting for a vendor invoice. The total of this should match the total of these two together. Now, if yours is the same account for both of them, that's fine. You're going to see the same number in both of them, so then don't add them up together. For me, I actually have them set up as two separate accounts. So if I look at my GL settings, GL tracking options, pre-billing my purchase orders, I have a 2120 and a 2121. So anytime I pre-bill either the purchase order or insertion and broadcast order, they will post to these two different accounts. They will get shown up on this report. The total of this should match what's on my balance sheet for the total of these two combined. Okay. Any questions? And that is, again, on my Today Accounting page. My PO pre-bill accrual and my media pre-bill accrual, they're right here and they match. Okay, so that is, once again, still part of that, making sure that those match. Creating that final bank rec, we've got that. Now we can set the closing date. So the closing date is really that option to be able to say, I finalized all my numbers. I don't want anybody going into the past now and posting a vendor invoice from 6 months ago or a client invoice or a receipt. I have my numbers and I want that reserved. So I can go under the More button here and I can set my close date. Now that close date, if I were closing, let's say the month of October, I would go ahead and say January 1st, whoops, January 1st, November 1st. So what that says is anything from November 1st and forward, because it's an inclusive date, everything from November 1st and forward, I can still post within the system. But if I were to try to post one of these transactions from the past, and I post it, it tells me that, whoops, I cannot post an invoice earlier than 11/1. So it does stop posting from happening. So you can set your GL close date here. Okay. For those of you who really want to close things down, there is a GL close date for time entries. And I don't know if a lot of people utilize this or not. In your transaction preferences, I think it's transaction preferences, time entries, yep. No time entries before the GL close date. So that is normally off by design. So you have to actually say that, hey, because if people did their billing and then all of a sudden you say, hey, you can't start putting time in back to January or February. I've already accounted for everything, especially if you're posting WIP. You can also set a specific date. So, hey, yes, I'm posting WIP and I'm doing this, but we have a 1 month reprieve. So I would set it maybe for, September 30th rather than October 30th or 31st, that type of thing. So there is an option in here to not allow people to enter time, and that's trying to get people to put their time in on time because, of course, we're posting work in progress and we're making sure that all timesheets are in and approved and done beforehand. Okay. I know we're going a little long. The only thing I wanted to kind of say is when our corporate P&L, you have an option to do custom layouts. So if you've never worked with custom layouts, they're kind of pretty simple. So I have one set up here that basically said, hey, I did Q1 through Q4 of the prior year. I've got a prior year total. I'm comparing to current one of the current year plus the totals, and I went ahead and created a difference column. The look of that is in your GL settings, corporate P&L layouts. This is kind of what it would look like. Hey, these are the periods. Each period is 2 months worth. I'm doing it for last year. Then I get down to that difference column where I'm doing a difference between prior year total and current year total. So you can set those up. If you have any questions about using custom layouts, we also have budget comparisons. So if you have not utilized any financial budgets, we do have a nice section in our help guide regarding financial budgets where I can do a comparison. And if I've got a financial budget, and I can go ahead and compare that, and I can kind of see, hey, this is what actually happened. This is what we were budgeting for. This was the difference that happened. And of course, my budget doesn't quite match my corporate P&L. One of the reports, last thing I'm going to kind of mention is the overhead allocation details report. This is a report that gets overlooked to me a lot, and I really kind of think it should be part of your monthly procedures. It is a report that basically will show you all of the expenses that come into either your COGS account, total for COGS account, that are vendor invoices that are coming in that do not have a client or a project. It's a way to double check and make sure, hey, should we have had these in here? Should we have posted this to a client or a project? Same thing with your expenses. It's the expenses that are coming in, your total for your expenses. This overhead allocation details is what is used when you start running, let's say, your client P&L and you're allocating overhead. It's taking the amounts from everything that's posted as an overhead, which you can verify that, and then running that when you run your client P&Ls in the system. Client P&L Multi-view and detail view, great reports. They're an opportunity to see how are my projects doing or how are my clients doing? Am I really making money on them? I may do a lot of work for them, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'm making a lot of money on them. It's that opportunity to kind of see, you know, one line per client. How are we doing with each client and where are we spending our time? Same thing with project P&L detail view, which is looking at one project versus multi-view, which looks at multiple projects all at one time. You can group it by project type. Are these projects, we do a lot of them, but are they making us money or are we just spending a lot of time just doing a little busy work on them? So it's that real opportunity to start to look at all the data that you're getting into the system and see where are we making money and where should we put our time and efforts to. So hopefully I answered everybody's questions. Let's see. I should have asked this earlier. We have more than 70 unposted transactions and 160 very old. We would prefer to just delete rather than void, but I'm not seeing delete in the drop-down option. You would actually have to open them up, just click on it and delete. Click on it and delete. There's not going to be a mass delete option. You might be able to, depending on the transaction, if you're maybe looking at client invoices or something, but I don't even know. Let's see if I looked at open invoices. You could do a mass delete. So if they're client invoices, I would go and look at all the unapproved or unposted ones. If they're client invoices, then you could do a mass delete from there. Might be the same thing with vendor invoices. Go to the vendor invoice listing screen, look at all the ones that are, unposted, do a date range, and then you can mass delete from there. The rest of them, probably going to have to be an individual delete. All right. Appreciate you guys taking a little extra time with me. Hopefully I covered what needed to be covered. And if you do have any questions, please do not hesitate to let us know. And if you have any ideas for any future vendor webinars that you would like to see something on, go ahead and submit that and let us know, because we're always kind of looking for what are our clients wanting to hear from us about. Happy to do that. All right. Thank you guys. Appreciate your time. Have a great day.